All right, now we're going to go to the University of Virginia. That's where the fraternity featured in that discredited Rolling Stone story called A Rape on Campus. Well, that frat is now suing the magazine. The scathing report about the article by the Columbia School of Journalism, who was brought in by Rolling Stone to review their practices, said the magazine appeared hell-bent on going with the story regardless of facts. I want to read you just a part of that report here. And again, this is from the Columbia School of Journalism. In fact, the head of that used to be the former managing editor of the Washington Post. This read, the magazine set aside or rationalized as unnecessary essential practices of reporting that, if pursued, would have likely led the magazine's editors to reconsider publishing Jackie's narrative so prominently, if at all. And the magazine admitted there were problems from top to bottom, saying the failure encompassed reporting, editing, editorial supervision, and fact-checking. Now, despite a failure from top to bottom, nobody at Rolling Stone was fired, and the freelance writer who wrote the story apparently will continue writing for Rolling Stone. Okay. Dougie, help me out here. Listen, I understand probably better than most. Mistakes can be made when you're reporting. But A, this was an investigative piece, which they weren't on deadline for, really, so they had time to do it. If you show a disregard to fact check, and you go into a story with a conclusion already made, how does that mitigate from sloppy journalism when it comes to libel?
Well, first off, you're not talking about a criminal offense here. You're talking about negligence, right?
Yep.
So negligence would be 51%. But here it actually seems like there's intentional conduct, which would raise it. This could actually be, there could be something punitive here, meaning that if they had intentional, from the beginning they were trying to discredit these people, it could be a higher level that they're stepping into. I mean, everybody's allowed to make mistakes, Rich, but if the mistakes are mistakes, that's one thing. But if it's purposely trying to get something that's not true, that's a totally different animal.
To me, there obviously was a sympathetic figure, and they wanted to paint the picture. But if you don't get multiple sources, if you don't check your source, if you don't verify any facts here, is it enough to say, you know what, I was misled? And in fact, that's what they said initially. They kind of blamed Jackie in this case. She told us X, Y, and Z. She misled us. Is that a viable argument?
You have to print it, right? You have to print it.
But that's, no, I mean, but you also have evidence that, as you say, that they rationalized evidence to the contrary. When you have a reckless disregard for the truth or a reckless disregard for evidence that shows that what you're about to print may not be true, then I think it is actionable. You know, it's one thing to be misled. It's another thing to be misled to the point where while you're checking your sources, the person misleading you succeeds in having you not know the truth. You're trying. You're trying and you're still coming up with the same conclusion. The evidence is all pointing to the same conclusion. But when you're hell-bent on printing that conclusion and ignoring evidence to the contrary,
it's because you want to push a narrative, is what you want to do.
You want to sell paper?
Explain this one to me, Mark.
Well,
if you were counseling, if you were counseling Rolling Stone,
I would counsel them to go out of business, because let's face facts. Rolling Stone hasn't been relevant in 20 or 30, no, seriously, it hasn't been relevant in 20 or 30 years.
Incident number 2 where Mark goes off the page.
It's not a credible source of journalism.
By the way, I disagree with you in that some of their stuff is terrific, but there's a second point, okay? They chose to not only not fire anybody, but they chose to retain her. Now, is the logic, I guess, that if you let somebody go, you're basically acknowledging culpability?
But they've acknowledged culpability already.
Right, so why not do some house cleaning to show you're serious about it?
Because it defies logic, because they're not serious, and they haven't been serious in years about presenting balanced journalism. This was in the typical Rolling Stone rush to judgment. The conclusion drives the narrative, and they want to
Man, we got to find a way to bring Mark out to tell us what he really thinks. Sometimes it's so hard to read between the lines.
Well, I mean, Jan Wenner. I mean, does anybody think Jan Wenner's not even involved with the thing anymore? And there are no real credible balanced journalists.
Let me try this again, Mayo. Is there any argument that says honest mistake, and that journalism, by definition, it's not science. There's an art to it. Yes, you're supposed to fact check and stuff too, but at the end of the day, the burden, how high is it going to be for this fraternity to say, and is there a risk by the fraternity going after it that they're going to have to basically open up their own books too?
Well,
I mean, you can have your own discovery both ways, right?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, really you're talking about journalism. We're not talking about creative writing. And what happens here is not unique to Rolling Stone. So you have lots of media outlets that have perhaps a narrative they tend to follow. But you have a due diligence requirement to make sure that you try to get it right. So you go out and you speak to both sides, or at least you attempt to speak to both sides. When you only speak to one side and you totally ignore the other side that's out there, you're really doing a disservice. And you know, we rely on the media basically to hold government in check.
Well, I got a subject on the other side where I could see a split on the table potentially.
No.
Yes. Right now, employers are allowed to ask job applicants whether they have criminal records. Well, one city in our region, by the way, the city of Newburgh, working on a plan that would ban that practice. But the question is, could that leave companies open to lawsuits if they don't properly screen somebody and they wind up hurting a coworker when their past record said that that would be a foreseeable possibility? We're going to get into that debate after this.